There we go. Well, welcome everybody. I'm James Poviwa, and I'm the chair of the Sustainable Economy Advisory Council, and I am calling this meeting of April 11th, 2023 to order. I will now do the roll call for our council members. Daisy Maldonado. Daisy, I believe you were present. I see you on. Mark you as present. Patricia Knighton.
Present.
Thank you. Glenn Schiffbauer.
Present.
Thank you. Rob Black.
Present.
Thank you. Bessie Arias.
I'm here, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for joining. Jonathan Perry.
Present.
Thank you. Mayeni Barudin.
Present.
Thank you. Atza Chavez, believe may join but is excused if she's not able to join. JT Woolley. Wendy Atcity.
Here.
Thank you. Janine Yazzie is unable to attend. Joe Little. Marissa Naranjo. Thank you all for attending today. We have on our agenda several different items to discuss, one of them being a presentation from our New Mexico Economic Development Department's contractor agenda, who will be first to present, and we'll go through a Q&A afterwards. And then we will also have a discussion about the structure of SEAC, including some of the gains that were made during this last legislative session, and we'll move on to public comment. I believe that is all. I am just looking at the room to see if there are any other guests that I wanted to acknowledge. For now, no. So I want to turn it over to Agenda. Who are the folks in the room from Agenda? Could you please go ahead and identify yourself?
Hello, hi. Yes, this is Georges Scott. I'm with Senior VP at Agenda. And joining me also is Tanner Osmond from Westwood.
Thank you both for joining us. And I believe you have a 15 to 20 minute presentation. And then I assume you'll be open for questions from our committee members.
Yes, sir.
Great,
and I'll turn it over to Tanner.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and then we can get underway with the presentation. So hopefully everybody is looking at a title slide which says New Mexico Economic Development Strategic Plan Update. Can everybody see this?
I can see it, so I think everyone else can as well.
Great. Okay. Well, once again, good afternoon, everybody. We were asked to speak to this group to give them a sense of the work that we're undertaking on behalf of the New Mexico EDD. So I'm just going to speak, as you mentioned, for 15-20 minutes, just to give you a little bit of insight about what it is that we're up to. So this particular project is really a collaboration between two companies. The first is Agenda.
Oh shoot!
Agenda
Let's
Global.
make sure everybody is on mute. We're getting a little bit of an echo.
Thank you. This is the lead and the prime contractor in this work is Agenda Global, and I think many of you may be familiar with the company. They are a local Albuquerque-based company who works in the spaces of marketing, advertising, strategic communications, but the sort of overarching umbrella is that they are a public affairs company. They have a long legacy of work, not only in New Mexico, but across the United States and even across the world, where they have offices in other locations. Now, Agenda, as a public affairs firm, really specializes in the policy making arena, where they sort of rely on their expertise with respect to community outreach and communicating on behalf and advocating particular policy positions. Agenda is joined in this project by Westwood, and Westwood is not quite a spin-off of Agenda, but one of the founding members of Agenda, of Westwood, I should say, once worked for Agenda Global. And so Westwood itself is a company which has ties to New Mexico. One of the co-founders of the company, even though we are a company based in California, one of the co-founders of the company is from New Mexico also. So Westwood is a company, again, which has pretty deep roots in the region. Westwood differs from Agenda in that we are an organization which specializes in local economic development, analysis, and local economic development planning. So there are really sort of two main areas of specialty that Westwood that describes Westwood's work. The first is in our analysis of local economies. So we have a pretty heavy data analysis component to what it is we do, but we also have the sort of qualitative planning side of our work. So our organization is comprised of local economic development professionals and practitioners, or at least people who were very active in the world of local economic development planning. And so we do a lot of work with local governments with respect to providing strategic development plans, recovery plans, and analysis of local economies, whether that's the analysis of the local industry base or local workforce. The reason that the two companies, Agenda and Westwood, work together on this project is because we have complementary skills. On the one hand, you have Agenda Global, which has the presence in New Mexico, has the expertise with respect to the local policy landscape, and a lot of deep local networks. Westwood, on the other hand, again, are the specialists when it comes to analysis of local economies. Now, the two organizations have a pretty deep history of working in the...
I apologize for interrupting. There is one important housekeeping item that I neglected to mention at the beginning of our meeting. There is language interpretation available for anyone who would like that Spanish language interpretation. If you click on the little globe at the bottom of the screen that says interpretation, there you will be able to select the interpretation that you may want. This is important for English language speakers. If you choose, you should select English interpretation, as there may be public comment or other comment that is not in English, and this will allow you to have access to the interpretation. Somos, am I missing anything on language access? Okay, thank you, and apologies for the interpretation. Tanner, please proceed.
No problem at all. So I was saying that each of the companies, both Agenda and Westwood, has a pretty deep history of having worked in the local economic development space. I'm not going to go through each one of these projects in detail, that they're listed here just to give you a sense of our experience when it comes to working on local economic development projects. So how is it that we come to be here in front of you today? So just to provide you with a little bit of history, in 2021, the state of New Mexico completed what is called a comprehensive economic development strategy. These strategies are otherwise known as SEDS. Now, SEDS is a requirement for each organization which receives money from the EDA, the Economic Development Administration. When they provide funds to governments across the United States, they also require that each of these organizations undertake a SEDS, a strategy for economic development. And the idea behind the SEDS is for communities to take stock of their economy, understand what the strengths are in their economy, understand what the weaknesses are, and to come together to create a roadmap which will outline and highlight the trajectory that the economy might take over the next 5 or 10 years. So effectively, a SEDS is a local economic development plan which identifies a path forward and aspirations and goals which a local economy might seek to reach over the short and medium term. Now, in 2021, this report was completed, and Agenda and Westwood were commissioned, for lack of a better term, this year to provide 3 supplements to this 2021 report. So the first thing that Agenda and Westwood are tasked with is updating and supplementing the existing data analysis, which is in the report. The second of our objectives is to understand to what extent the recommendations in that economic development strategic plan have been implemented across the state's different departments and agencies. And the third part of our engagement is to update the community engagement aspects of the report to ensure that all voices across the New Mexico community are familiar with the SEDS and also are able to provide their input about what is contained within the SEDS. And I'm just going to spend the remainder of my time describing these 3 points here, which is the work that we are actively and currently undertaking. So first, with respect to data updates. So this was a report that was completed in 2021, but a lot has changed in that time. In 2021, we were in the early innings, so to speak, of the economic recovery from the pandemic. Since that time, we have 2 years of additional data, which provide us with a much better insight as to how it is the state's economy has recovered from the pandemic. So to give you a couple of examples of how things have changed over this time, when the report was completed in 2021, the unemployment rate in New Mexico was around about 8%. Today, the unemployment rate in New Mexico, as of February 2023, is 3.6%. So there's been a big change in the unemployment rate, again, because with the sort of passage of time, the state's economy has improved, and the purpose of our undertaking is to provide these more recent data points. In fact, in New Mexico, which is tracked by this blue line here, this blue line tracks the unemployment rate in the state. The unemployment rate today is actually lower than it was prior to the pandemic. With respect to the labor market recovery, when the initial report was completed in 2021, there was a considerable job deficit compared to the pre-pandemic period. So New Mexico's economy still had fewer jobs in 2021 than it did prior to the beginning of the pandemic. Now, February, this past February in 2023, is a momentous month because this is the first month in which the state's economy has recovered all of the jobs that were lost initially at the beginning of the pandemic. So again, that is something that we're able to update within the report. Now, although the state's economy is now sort of back above water, so to speak, now has more jobs than it did prior to the pandemic, that does not mean that each sector within the state's economy has been performing equally. What this table here does is compare employment change from February 2020, so that was the month sort of prior to the pandemic, with the employment level in February 2023. And what this chart is showing us is how many more or fewer jobs there are in each sector of the economy within the state compared to the pre-pandemic period. So this top line here is telling us that there are 1,200 more jobs in the state's economy today than there were prior to the pandemic. And you can see that in some sectors of the economy, there are more jobs today than were prior to the pandemic. And in other sectors of the economy, there's still a deficit. So again, these are things that would, the types of things that we'll be looking to update in the existing report. Explain how it is that transportation, warehousing and utilities has had a stronger recovery, for example, than the leisure and hospitality sector. So again, these are all sort of important data points which are going to give the sort of state better sense of how the economy has been recovering from the pandemic. So again, one part of our services that we're providing is to update the existing data that exists in the report. Another feature of what it is that we're doing is to supplement the existing analysis in the report. And we will really be focusing on adding additional data in one particular area. And that is with respect to the sort of socio-demographic changes which have occurred within the state. So at the time that the 2021 report was completed, the most recent sort of data available, which would be available from the Census Bureau, referred to the period in 2019. So again, when the report was completed in 2021, there were just not data sets available from the United States Census Bureau that enabled us to understand how the pandemic had affected different sort of demographic characteristics within the state's economy. Because one of the features of the pandemic has been that there has been some sort of social upheaval. So we've seen changes in a variety of areas. The first is that we see greater work from home activity today than we did prior to the pandemic. You'll see in the news talk of a wave of early retirements that happened during the pandemic. You also see in the news information about migration of workers leaving cities for more suburban locations, or workers migrating from one state to another. And at the time that the initial report was written in 2021, it wasn't possible to provide some information and data to speak to how the pandemic had affected the change in the social demographic character of the state of New Mexico. And that is one thing that we will be able to do in this report by way of supplementing existing information. And here is just a chart which tracks work from home activity, both in New Mexico and the United States. And you can see that both in the US and New Mexico, you see a big jump, a quadrupling of the number of people working from home today compared to the period prior to the pandemic. So yeah, part one of our services is to update and supplement data in the report. The second part of our analysis is going to be to look at the strategies that were proposed in the 2021 report, understand, and we've been working in collaboration with the EDD in this respect, understand which agencies and departments were tasked with putting in place particular strategies to improve and enhance the performance of the New Mexico economy. And the idea would be for Agenda and Westwood to interview the departments and agencies who are responsible for elements of the state's economic development strategy to understand how things have been going. Where does strategy implementation stand? Have there been any barriers to implementing strategy? If there have been barriers to implementing strategies, what are these barriers, and how is it possible that we might be able to overcome some of these barriers? What are some of the lessons that have been learned with respect to implementing the state's economic development strategy? And are there any initial results? Are there strategies that have been put in place that are going to enable us to assess how well these strategies have been performing? And here I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. The 2021 report identifies a number of strategies and priorities for the state's economy, from modernizing the state's economic development ecosystem, to strengthening New Mexico's communities, to implementing programs and measures to upskill the New Mexican labor force, to ensuring that New Mexico is more inclusive with respect to equity and economic justice. Now, these are just some of the strategies that exist in the report. The key point is that for each of these strategies, there's a state department, there's a state agency who is responsible for implementing that strategy. We're going to be speaking with them again to understand how the strategy implementation has been going. The final part of our engagement and what it is that we will be, the services that we are providing, is to enhance and supplement the community engagement aspects of the 2021 report. And of course, community engagement is a critical element to any sort of strategizing and policy efforts to ensure that we have as far a reach as possible and as many voices as possible are heard with respect to shaping undertakings that the state is pursuing. So in collaboration with EDD, the project team is in a process of identifying a diverse range of stakeholders, and critically, not just a diverse range of stakeholders, but particularly stakeholders who may not have been represented, I should say, as well as they could have when the 2021 report was completed, to again hear their perspectives on the said strategy. So we will be asking these stakeholders a series of questions. We'll be sort of presenting them with the key strategies from the report and getting their input as to how they think these strategies might work for their individual communities. And that is essentially, in sort of the broadest terms, 3 services that we will be providing with the EDD: updating data, understanding how well the strategy identified in the 2021 report have been implemented, and then thirdly, enhancing the community outreach from the original report. We have a pretty tight timeline for this project. As I mentioned, we are actively working on the different aspects of this project, but we have an end date of June 2023. So it scares me every time I look at that date because it's coming so close. Or it's not too far off now, but we will be finalizing our engagement and delivering our findings and closing out this project by June 30th. And that is all I have to share with you today. We look forward to any questions you may have about what it is that we're up to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanner. So already have a couple hands raised, but is there anything else from agenda?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Patricia, please go ahead. And just FYI, this Q&A is open to SEAC council members.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation agenda, Tanner, I guess. I'm sorry. And thank you, James. So in terms of your timeline right now, the May-June timeframe, we're approaching your draft review. Do you intend to share that draft beyond the EDD?
Without sort of bunting the question, I would defer to the EDD here. We are primarily interacting with EDD, but beyond EDD, I don't have a sense of
okay
how the draft will be shared.
Shani, I don't know if you are. I believe you're on.
Yeah, I can. So I can't speak to that because our deputy secretary is technically the person overseeing most of the RFP process. Ideally, for that community engagement piece, there's a huge desire for the members of the advisory council to be able to be involved in giving that feedback and participating in that community engagement, which is why Agenda has presented to you all today. So that feedback and engagement is one, really needed, but also will infer that interim report that is going to go to our leadership.
Gotcha.
I am sure that our leadership would be more than happy to I'm not sure, but my guess is that leadership would not have an issue and would absolutely be willing to entertain kind of updates on the report as it comes along. But y'all's input is definitely really a critical piece in getting that interim report pulled together. So
gotcha. Thank you.
I'm just going to go ahead and make the request right now to the secretary and to EDD that SEAC be able to see some of the updated reports before it's published, finalized. And yes, I think that the community engagement portion of this contract is important, and definitely want to weigh in on this. I think we also want to be able to make some comments on the rest of the report as well. So I'll just formally make that request to you during this meeting.
Okay, great. I will talk with our deputy. Thank you.
Trisha, anything? Did you have other questions?
No, not now. Thank you very much. Yep.
Excellent, thank you. Any other council members? Do you have any questions for Tanner and or agenda? I have a few questions, Tanner. Thank you so much for your presentation. Really appreciate it. Can you please provide this to via New Mexico Economic Development Department, this presentation? Just send the slides over.
No problem with that whatsoever. That's yeah.
Okay, excellent. And then I was also wondering, just moving beyond the young woman with her dog at a farmer's market, how you would like to interact with us around meaningful community engagement.
We're actually going to have that discussion tomorrow internally, Tanner and the rest of the team here, on how we want to structure that. So I can't give you an answer right yet, but that's one of the things that we are working on, how we want the framework for that to look like.
Okay, and it's Mr. Scott, I don't want to mispronounce your first name.
Oh, it's okay. It's Georges.
Georges, would you please reach out to me because I want to make sure that we can collaborate with you all on community
absolutely
engagement.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
I don't have your contact information, but I can get it through EDD.
Yeah, Felicia has it.
Great, excellent. And then you were talking about just demographics, especially of the workforce. And I'm really interested to how granular you're going to get on that, both on industry, region, race, gender, ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so there's a sort of a few factors there. So obviously this is a state economic development plan. So a lot of the statistics are sort of statewide in scope, but we do break the state into regions also. So yes, we will be tracking sort of the recovery across these dimensions across some of the sub-regions within the state. With respect to the demographic, there's not
sorry about that, Tanner. So I feel like the regions are really important because New Mexico is geographically a really large state. And we don't have a whole lot of people here, but we're pretty diverse. And so I'm very interested in hearing or understanding what the recovery looks like and the challenges and opportunities are in the Permian Basin, for instance, versus in Northwest New Mexico and everywhere in between.
No, absolutely. And you're quite right to say that sort of those parts of the state which are sort of more heavily reliant on sort of oil and gas extraction will have formed differently from the recovery than, say, a metropolitan area like Albuquerque. And I'm just trying to, well, maybe this is not the best time to do this, but we have a list of the state's metro and micropolitan regions, and we'll be able to provide data analysis. So that you will be able to look at particular communities that you might be interested in to see, how that recovery has occurred. Because, like I said, it wasn't until February 23 that the labour market has recovered all the jobs lost, but that is of course varying across the communities that make up the state. Some communities have performed better than others.
Specifically on that, do you have a plan for trying to get some kind of demographic information and data on harder to measure populations like immigrant populations and indigenous, especially tribal communities?
Yeah, I mean, that is always a key area of challenge, right? Whether that is in New Mexico or any other part of the US, it's trying to reach members of communities that aren't always available through formal channels or aren't easily reachable through formal channels. So one of the ways that we try to get around holes that might exist in sort of more official data is to try and use what people refer to as sort of high frequency data or alternative data points. So for example, you can track work activity and commute flows through people's cell phone data today, and other sorts of mobility-based data that might exist on sort of social media platforms. So there are ways that we can try and triangulate to try and recover to primarily measure sort of economic activity across areas which might be hard to reach using sort of formal data channels.
Okay, great. I would love if we could follow up on that, and looking forward to chatting with you all further about it. SEAC, I think, can be a real resource, and our connected advocacy organization. So, we is very excited that this is being updated, and appreciate your work. And we also just want to make sure that if there are resources that we can connect you with, then it ends up in this report, and we end up with some information that is really helpful to getting the long-term work done. I also wanted to ask if one of the mandates of both the Sustainable Economy Advisory Council and the actual task force is to implement aspects of the New Mexico Workforce Development Study that was conducted in 2020, and that's mandated in statute. And I wanted to ask if you all are going to offer recommendations on how to implement that study or aspects of it.
And sorry, that is, to be clear, that is a separate document from the SEDS, is that correct?
That's correct. So this council and the Sustainable Economy Advisory Task Force in statute is required to implement aspects of the New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions study that was came out in 2020. If you're not aware of it, which sounds like you're not, I am happy to point you in the direction to see that study, but it is something that we're required to do.
Sure, I would love to take a look at the study and also have sort of discussions with the sort of EDD, who are ultimately sort of who we're reporting to in this case, to see to what extent we can be of assistance there, if that is what they would want us to do.
Yeah, thank you, Tanner, and thank you, James. I think for this specific task for this RFP was specifically around updating the strategic plan that's like the New Mexico's Empower and Collaborate Path Forward. So any specifically stated objectives by statute from SB 112 for the advisory council would be for the advisory council to move towards finalizing. I know we don't have a ton of administrative support for that group, but that would actually most likely fall on to us as admin staff, Felicia and I, Shawnee, as opposed to this particular group. But James, we should absolutely chat further about it on offline.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Shawnee. I appreciate it. And my final question is, are you all looking at other areas, other examples what we talk about often in this council is a just economic transition, which, we're all very excited about the many opportunities that New Mexico has to transition to an economy that does not destroy our air, land, and water, and in which, all of our community members can thrive. Other states that talk about just transition include Colorado and other states that have, similar, if we're talking about comparing apples to apples, oftentimes Utah comes up. But I appreciate that you all have been given a contract to be able to look through these ideas and make some recommendations. Are there other areas that you're looking at as examples?
Well, so one area that I know that Agenda has been particularly keen on is the whole, I say the whole, but the sort of renewable energy strategies. And so we were having a discussion sort of last week about the opportunities that might exist in New Mexico, and we were thinking about other states which have been pursuing renewable energy strategies. That isn't speaking, I don't think, directly to your well, I think it's somewhat related to your sustainability comment that you made there. So yeah, this is something that we are actively discussing as a plausible strategy for the New Mexico economy.
Great, thank you. So I guess my request is, any examples or of states or communities that are doing well are very much appreciated if you can be included into the report, and also to really frame what sustainable means, I think can be very broad. I often talk about it, as I just said, an economy that doesn't destroy our air, land, and water. And we often get into a place of a one-to-one replacement for oil and gas jobs. And that is not necessarily the right framing to do. I think we all need to think creatively about what kind of economy can be established in our really wonderful and beautiful state. Are there any other questions or comments from committee members?
Oh,
Okay. Yes, Glenn.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Tanner, for your presentation. I just to piggyback a little bit on what James has been asking and sort of stimulating some of my questions. If this is an update of the 2021 plan, and I believe that Agenda was not involved with that plan, but with the 9 different industries that were identified that we have been tasked to help the task force pursue, I'm curious as to what data you have found with sustainable agriculture. I mean, there's some of these things that we've been hoping to pursue that may or may not have a lot of traction yet and a lot of data available. And I understand, Agenda, thank goodness, is a benefit corporation, but they also have a lot of background in the policies for the very industry that we are tasked for moving away from. And I'm curious as to why you want to, or not want, but how is the process going to be for you to access some of the other industries that we're having trouble to access and to, motivate and proliferate?
Yes, sorry if I, and so your name was Glenn.
Glenn.
And sorry, I think, please correct me if I misunderstood, but you were asking specifically how you would be able to measure activity it was with respect to sustainable agriculture. Is that correct? One of the
not specifically that, but the 9 industries, film and sustainable agriculture, sustainable energy, those kinds of things are, what we are trying to develop. And it would be wonderful if there was a lot of data available for that. And I just wondered if, you have the avenue to get to those at this point, or if you have a plan that you're thinking of how we're going to access some of those lesser developed industries here.
And sorry, specifically how we would access the data to sort of measure the presence of these sectors within the state.
Exactly. Maybe because, I mean, I would love to think that they are readily available, but
yeah, so
we don't seem to be able to find them.
Yeah, in the original report, when it comes to measuring industries, we use, or the convention is to use codes which are provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and these are known as NAICS codes.
NAICS,
yes, every industry has a code associated, or every firm can be associated with a particular NAICS code. So in the original report, the industries were defined at the NAICS level, but as I think you're alluding to here, one of the problems that you have is when you have a small industry, a lot of data can be suppressed for reasons of confidentiality. And so having worked with this data in the past, there are 2 ways that you can sort of work around this. One is if you actually use the ACS, which is the Census Bureau survey for tracking people. It does identify people by the industry that they work in there, and suppression codes don't operate in quite the same way that they do with data which will be provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. There are instances where you can access confidential data if you follow the right protocols, and if this is approved by either a state or a federal agency, which might be one avenue also to get around confidentiality. So there are a couple of things that we've typically employed in the past to try and handle problems of confidentiality.
Thanks, James. Thank you, Tanner.
Great, thank you, Councillor Schiffbauer. Thank you. We can close up this portion of our meeting, but I do have one thought or question. One of my colleagues brought this up, and to what extent are you including other studies that have already been done? Yes, this is an update to a previous study, but as I mentioned, the Department of Workforce Solutions study was conducted in 2020. And I know that the University of New Mexico, they actually presented on an active study that they're doing on the Permian Basin. And so, to what extent, Tanner, are you all doing a dive into the research that's already out there?
Oh, we do not work, from a blank canvas. Not only do we have the research which was done with respect to the original report, but we will undertake efforts and are in the process of just sort of assembling, other, documents that exist with respect to the economy to sort of to inform our understanding, if nothing else, our context for, the type of activities which are being followed in the state's economy. So we don't typically like to do anything in a vacuum. We will be reviewing, and anything you have, James, that you can send to us and recommend in case we miss something, that would be greatly appreciated.
Great. I have one other thing, but Rob, Councillor Black.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it. Tanner, it's a pleasure to meet you, and Georgia's pleasure. I think one of the things I would offer up from the Chamber's perspective, we had produced Driving New Mexico's Future as an economic competitive analysis that was about 6 months before the state's work. We're happy to share in all the research we have. We did share that with SRI. Happy to share that with you as well. But I think for me, the conversation that's taking place today, and what James is talking about, the need for a just transition. is certainly important. But I think where we as a broader community have to really, and what I think the role of part of what we have to do on the task force is, in order to have that transition, we have to grow other parts of our economy and really have an emphasis around what are we going to do to be competitive? What are those states, like James mentioned, Colorado, doing that has positioned them, whether it's in aerospace or some of these other industries, that on those strategies and tactics that has moved the needle. And so I do look forward to hearing from the report, because it does sound like what you're going to be doing is looking at those strategies and tactics, and are they working? Have we even tried to implement them? And if not, I hope there's then what, right? Because I would hate for the report just to be, we did a report, we're not really implementing it, that's it. Because we do need, I think, I'd love to understand what you are contemplating as far as the action plans that come out of what you do, because we do a lot of reports in New Mexico. We don't do a lot of action. So what are the things that, that's, I think, one piece from the Mexico Chamber side, the business community side. Love to see that assessment of what we're doing well, what we need to improve, and then what are the next steps.
Yeah, and thank you, Robin. As you may be aware, but one of the strategies in this sense was for diversification, which, you know, at times can be a bit of a sort of a throwaway recommendation, because you look across, you know, economic development strategies throughout the US, and most strategies would have something devoted to diversification. But to your point, Rob, you know, part of the process here is to actually speak to the agencies and departments who were charged with diversification to find out to what extent that, you know, this recommendation is not something which is just going to sit on the shelf, but, you know, how does the sort of rubber hit the road, so to speak? What is being undertaken, and how successful has that been? And then if we find, as I think I mentioned, sort of roadblocks for us to be able to write in the strategy, this is why this is the problem that is being faced with respect to diversification. Is it a funding thing? Is it a community buy-in thing? You know, what is it that is or have there been any issues with respect to implementing this strategy? And if so, what can we do to ensure that we could better pursue one of the particular recommendations?
Thank you, Tanner. That sounds great. That's exactly what I was hoping would be moving forward out of the report. Thank you.
And I would just say to everybody, Rob just mentioned a report there. I put my email address in the chat here. I know James had referenced some reports as well. This is, you know, you can get my contact information from the New Mexico EDD, but my email address is just there. If there's anything you want to sort of throw my way in terms of reports that the Chamber has done, or sort of, you know, other agencies that you think, you mentioned, I think, a report from the state of from the local university, please, by all means, you know, feel free to share them with me. I would be delighted.
Great. Thank you, Tanner. I appreciate it. And thank you, Rob, for your comments and question. And finally, you know, I just want to formally again request, I guess this is a different request, Shani, but I would like to meet with you, Tanner and Georges, regarding the report as soon as possible, to review how SEAC might be able to support your efforts. And I will follow up with you offline. And Rob, your questions around implementation, I think, are a really good segue into our next agenda item, which is structure for SEAC. Agenda, and Tanner, thank you for your presentation. Please send over your slides. Georges, did you want to say anything?
No, I just want to say thank you.
Great, thank you all.
Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is SEAC structure, and we've discussed this in the past, and I'm looking forward to implementing some of the ideas that we've had over the last year. And this conversation is going to be well, I'd like to lay it out, just give you all a preview what I would suggest we do. And then I will send a follow-up email with what I would call standing rules for our council. some of the things that you'll see in the suggested rules that I hope people will weigh in on and give me their thoughts and comments on, and vote on once we have something solid at our next meeting. And so things to look for are, I would suggest that we all agree that we do not miss more than 3 meetings in the year, unless if there's an excused absence. I would also like to establish standing working groups that meet once a month off of our regularly scheduled SEAC meetings. And I would also like to make it a requirement that SEAC members sit on those working groups. I need to take a look at the working groups that we all agreed that we would establish about a year ago and never got off the ground, which, you know, I'm looking forward that we can get them moving, but some of those will include working group on tribal engagement, Permian Basin working group, and there were a few others. So look for a email from me laying out what I'm suggesting, and I would like us all to just comment on that offline, have a discussion at our next meeting at the end of the month, and vote on them to implement. But really quickly, are there any comments or thoughts on that? Great. So the other thing that I think is really going to influence how we organize ourselves as a body this year is, you know, now that the governor has had a final say on legislation and budgeting that happened during the legislature, doing an account of where we're at. There were, as you know, we had a special meeting called in early February to endorse HB 188, I believe is the number, which did a lot of things that we were really very excited about as a body. And that included establishing a fund for economic transition, about $10 million. And then I believe another $3 million to support the work of SEAC, both in staffing and in community engagement. And then the third thing, which, you know, we can work on in the long term, was ensuring that each one of us as volunteer members have the support we need to be able to participate and do the work of this committee through per diem. And one of the advocacy organizations that was very deeply involved in the legislation and the funding, I wanted to invite to give a bit of a presentation on what was actually accomplished in the budget. And so I'm going to invite Marcela Diaz from Somos un Pueblo Unido, Executive Director, to give us a little bit of a rundown. Marcela, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. We're kind of thrilled that the funding that is ending up going to DWS, Department of Workforce Solutions, as well as the Economic Development Department to support economic transition initiatives, were primarily left intact by the governor and not vetoed. A few lines here and there, but it really is, I think, a testament to the work of community-based organizations like those who are on the call from Somos Lee County, as well as some key legislators who really fought for funding for these transition initiatives, as well as all of you. And even though House Bill 188, which morphed into House Bill 12, which contained those 3 items that you talked about, did not make it through the whole session, I think that it's important to note that the majority of that bill and the way that we all worked together to write it was funding for administrative support to high-level positions at EDD to manage, set force, and to do the work of the economic transit, all of the incredible work that needs to happen and the hard work that needs to happen through set force as well as SEAC. that was a big chunk of what this House Bill 188 and then House Bill 12 would have done. And then the seed money that we wrote language into the seed transition funding, that 10 million that would permit the use of funds. And it was a small amount, relatively speaking, but we also wanted it to be a receptacle for other funding, other state funding and federal funding to do, again, the important work of transitioning workers and communities and building social infrastructure in communities and workforce development infrastructure in communities to help along with this transition. And then the third piece, as you mentioned, was not only providing per diem for SEAC members to participate in in-person meetings and travel for the purposes of this work, but also to expand the membership of SEAC to include worker-based groups from, for instance, the Permian Basin, because there really isn't a lot of representation on this group of that, as well as more representation from workforce development programs and higher ed programs. So that's what it would have sought to do. But a lot of it was that funding for DWS and EDD, and a lot of that is there because of the way that it was inserted by some key legislative allies into the budget. And so I know that Representative Rubio was on this call for a short period of time, but she had to leave to prep for another call. But she, of course, was the main sponsor for our Just Transition Economic Transition Division bill. And she worked really closely with Representative Ortiz, Representative Nathan Small, and Representative Meredith Dixon and the Speaker's office to ensure that this funding would be there in the budget, and then it was not vetoed by the governor to accomplish a lot of the tasks and things that we wanted to do with House Bill 188 or House Bill 12. So we counted about $100 million, a little bit short of $100 million that's in the budget for what we term economic transition initiatives. So it's not nothing, right? And so we really we want to focus on the 50 million that is going to EDD for these kinds of programs. And I want to share my screen. I shared this with you, James, and so you have it. Are you all able to see the screen?
Yes, thank you.
So this is how it broke down. And again, it was, largely untouched by the veto pen. And the main funding, the purpose of the funding, this $50 million total appropriation to EDD, is for economic development projects, including border planning and infrastructure projects, advanced energy projects, economic transition initiatives, program administration and staffing through fiscal year 2027. And so here on the left-hand side of this are the purposes, but it's, about 5.5 million to MNERD, the Energy, Minerals and Natural Resources Department, for those economic development projects. Department Environment gets over $1 million, New Mexico Finance Authority, 1.3 million. The Department of Workforce Solutions, an additional 750,000. And then you'll see later on that they received additional funding for worker transition funds and assistance to workers who in the Permian, in the San Juan Basin, who need support and who did not necessarily receive it after the ETA, the Energy Transition Act, passed in 2019. Then there's additional funding to MNERD. So this is like pass-through funding. So it's going to EDD, but the money will end up with these particular agencies for monitoring and enforcement of these economic development projects that were named above. It's obviously very broad, very vague. And so the real work comes now, right, as we look to these agencies to spend the money well. More 1.5 million to the Environment Department for also monitoring these activities listed above, and another 860,000 to the Department of Environment for San Juan study, restoration, and remediation, as well as to MNERD, 500,000. So that makes up a little over 13 million. The rest goes to Economic Development Department for all of those projects. And so that's really where we see and where, based on our conversations with our legislators who put that money in there, is where we see our 13 million, right, and other projects to beef up the work that you are all doing along with SEAC. So, along with SETForce. So there's that. We also identified other funding that we would love for you to know about in the budget to assist displaced workers in affected communities pursuant to these sections in the Energy Transition Act. So it's 14.5 million to DWS, another 2.5 million to the Indian Affairs Department to assist tribal and Native people. This is the language in the budget that was not vetoed in the affected communities pursuant to the ETA. And another almost 6 million to assist in diversifying, and this is to EDD, and promoting the economy of communities affected by the closure of fossil fuel plants by fostering economic development unrelated to fossil fuel development or use. That's the language. There was another 13 million to EDD for LIDA, and while it originally said including energy transition assistance, that was struck out by the veto pen, but LIDA's still fairly broad, and so we'll see how EDD uses that funding. And then more money to DFA, 10 million for San Juan County energy transition. And so I'm happy to share this with James, who can share it with the rest of the folks. But all in all, I'm going to stop sharing. Often we see bills passed without the money. So this time we saw the money without the bill. And so it obviously gives a lot of leeway and discretion to EDD, DWS, and other agencies. But what we're recommending to SEAC is to make recommendations to EDD knowing about this funding. We know that EDD and if Shawnee wants to talk about this and the process in any way, that would be great for SEAC members. But we know that EDD is coming up with its fiscal year 2024 budget with these new numbers. And so, again, the intent for a lot of this funding is to develop and bolster and provide capacity to the work that we are all doing together through SEAC and SETForce in these projects. And so it might make sense to make some clear recommendations about where we would like to see that funding spent, where you would like to see that funding spent. So we're excited that the legislature and the governor is putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to these initiatives. And the truth is, it's more than what we asked for in our original bills. But now it's a matter of making sure that that funding gets to where it needs to get to so that we can do the diversification work in a just way that will ensure that for Somos, our members in the Permian Basin are being invested in.
Thank you, Marcella. Appreciate the analysis and really excellent work. Appreciation to the advocacy organizations who worked on all of this. Appreciation to EDD staff and to legislative champions like Representative Small, Representative Dixon, Representative Rubio, the list goes on. I want to open it up and also just yeah, Shawnee, if you have any comments, but also not to put you on the spot at all.
Sure. So I tried to talk to leadership about this earlier, but our leadership still is working on that plan for the 50 million that Marcella just went over. So I don't actually have any information further on that, more so that our leadership is like meeting to discuss what the use and like process is going to be for those funds. I did speak with you, James, yesterday about that being a great idea that Marcella had mentioned around advocating for projects and making those recommendations. I think some of the concrete deliverables that the advisory council was asked to look at was like equity principles that I think still haven't been formally adopted. I know that there was equity principles that the climate change task force had worked really hard to put together. James, I think you're a member of that team. I know that that's still a hard deliverable.
That's right, and Marcella as well.
Oh, and Marcella. Okay, yeah. So I know that that deliverable for this group is still kind of up in the air, but I do think that like working on equity principles and formalizing after you establish the equity principles and then formalizing recommendations as a group is going to be great steps for this group in the upcoming fiscal year. I don't even know where we are anymore. Anyway.
Thank you so much, Shawnee. Yeah, let's continue to follow up, and big thanks to Secretary Keys and to Deputy Secretary Clark. Really appreciate all of their huge support on all these efforts. Opening this up to any council members who have thoughts or questions about the presentation that Marcella gave around some of the budget items. All right, hearing none, I think we will keep moving on. My final thing that I wanted to mention about SEAC organization, internal structure. I am planning to travel the state, which I'm excited about, to visit each one of SEAC members if you're interested in meeting with me. So I will be reaching out to each one of you and hope to be able to visit you in your home communities. I also would like to start hosting hybrid virtual and in-person SEAC meetings in regions throughout the state. And the initial ones for sure that I would like to get on the books as soon as possible will be in Southeast New Mexico and Northwest New Mexico. So I'll be working with SEAC members to see if we can partner on hosting those meetings, and also with our community allies in those regions. If you are interested in hosting a SEAC meeting as a SEAC member of the council this year, please let me know. I'd love to work with you all to make that happen. And if there are no other comments or questions from SEAC members, I'm going to just move us to community comment. Okay, great. So if there is anybody on the line who is a member of the community who has anything that they'd like to comment on, please feel free to raise your hand or otherwise make yourself known. All right. Well, I appreciate all of the SEAC members, NMEDD, and other agency staff for attending, for public for attending today. Thank you for your service and advocacy. We will meet the 4th Tuesday of this month as regularly scheduled at 3 p.m. I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you all. And we are, oh gosh, I guess I should do the formal thing. SEAC members can, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Jonathan Perry, motion.
Thank you.
Second, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Jonathan. All in favor is aye.
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 Excellent. We are adjourned. We'll see you later this month.